Officially, whoa, that's really loud. Peanut Butter Falcon. You guys should watch it.
I'm leaving that in.
It's pretty good. It's a pretty good
I'm
movie.
leaving this all in.
Shia LaBeouf is the man.
LeBeau. Shia LaBeouf. All right, we're ready.
What's up? What's up? Do you need some help? All right, welcome back to the Creative Refresh. What's up, guys?
What's going on?
What's going on? You want to introduce yourselves, or I got to do it?
You can do it.
Oh, well, I'm just giving you guys attitude because that's the topic for today. Cheese.
Very much cheese.
Yeah, no. Oh, I'm Eddie Garcia, and we're at Jitters on Bryan, right, in Mission.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, and
You have to
here,
say jitters on Bryan.
yeah, like always, Ismael.
They somehow make it into every podcast.
Yeah, he's here. I don't know. I think he just came for the coffee. He might live here too.
I'm here for the coffee.
Yeah, and then of course, the man with the plan,
I wish I was. Man.
Manny, is
going
here
on?
chilling like always, and he's gonna guide us through this because I don't know what I'm doing.
Sounds good.
But yeah, what are we talking about today, guys?
So today's podcast, we're going to be talking about communication. So creatives tend to have a little bit of a problem with communicating their worth, their value, their pricing, stuff like that. And then essentially the attitude behind that kind of conversation, that communication. Typically, creatives don't understand how to have a conversation when it comes to, let's just say, a family member asks you for a video, and it's $100 or whatever, where you're like, ooh, okay. How do you approach that, right? When you have people that come up to you and don't value your worth or don't essentially understand what you do, how do you actually have that conversation? And then, how do you not act like a big jerk about it? Because I've had plenty of people ask me, like, hey, can you do this for free? And I look at them and I'm like, I mean, I could. But
Do it for the children, bro.
But I'm not going to.
Do it for the children.
So, having a good response to those kind of questions, those kind of conversations are what we're going for today. So, first of all, in terms of communication, right? What would you say is the hardest part of communicating in terms of creative? Like, let's say I'm a client, and I ask, I'll start with Ismail, like, hey, Ismail, if I had a video for you, what would I need to tell you so that you can essentially come back at me and have a very good way to price it out? Like, would I need to tell you what I need you for, the days, all that stuff?
It's a good question because I'm actually in the middle of that with a client
Cool.
now. As of last night, actually. He basically said, hey, how much would you charge to take pictures of a product? And that was it. I was like, all right, like,
I need more than that.
are you in Brownsville or are you here? So I basically had to ask him like location, what the product is, exactly what he needs. It turns out he only said pictures. Turns out he wanted pictures and video.
Yes.
Mm.
How long do I need to be there for is also a big one, and kind of like what it's for, because if it's for like social media, is he trying to sell it to somebody directly, or just what's it going to be used for? And another thing that I didn't ask, but I actually need to be on the phone with him, or face to face, is kind of understand his brand. You know what I mean? Totally. Like, what is he trying to put out there with this? What does he want to say with this video? So,
So on that topic, right? Because it's basically discovery with the client, and as creatives, we go through these phases in terms of testing a client out and see if there's a right fit and stuff like that. And this is where you're at. But in regards to that discovery phase, do you, as soon as you hear him say, I need pictures and video, is that already automatically okay, I need to increase my price
I
by
hear
this
the
much?
ching, like, okay,
Yeah.
the price went up. Whatever I was thinking, it just went up.
Okay. And
Hope he knows.
when it comes to, like, are you valuing...
bro, you just press a button, dude.
Right?
Let's be honest here.
Record. But are you basically walking... Are you walking through all the pricing in your head as he's talking to you?
Basically, I'm already thinking, like, I'm also trying to read the customer, like,
Definitely.
how interested is he really in investing, you know what I mean, into his brand. Um, because also like I kind of want to be able to tell like, am I wasting my time here? Am I gonna be wasting my time here?
Yeah.
Um, so I'm kind of thinking, okay, if he wants this and that, like, okay, I could give him this rate. But like I said, we do have to have that sit down to see how complicated or not complicated the job is gonna be, ultimately.
Totally understandable. There's a lot of cases where you will meet with a client and they will not know what they want. And it turns into, hey, I want a website. But then it's like, okay, well, do you need a
Mhm.
logo? Do you need to refresh your brand? Like, what are
Yeah.
we looking at here? Which brings me into, Eddie, same question for you. When you're running through, your process and stuff like that, how crucial is that communication in terms of like, hey, I need a logo. It's for a gym. That's it.
Yeah, I think it's so hard, like the need to put definitions to words. I think a lot of people think they know what they want
Mm-hmm.
and they communicate that, but then by asking questions and going through that conversation, that's not what they actually mean by like logos. Like I don't know how many times in the past I've been asked like, "Oh, I need a logo for a shirt," and it's like, no, you need a shirt design
Yes.
because you're just like selling shirts. Like your company already has a logo, or your church already has like it's not a logo because it's just an event that they're having and it's a shirt for that event. You know?
Do you end up having to tell them what they need
Yeah, but I had
rather
to.
than what
I
they
mean, yeah,
want?
yeah, for the most part. And I think we'll get that in the second part of like how to do that, right? But yeah, like people constantly come to me that they need logos, and it's like, do you? Let's figure this out. But then the ones that do need a logo, they wait until like they're about to launch and they need it in like 3 days. So there's a process, but I think the whole thing is like going back to defining words for people,
Yeah. Totally
because
understand.
they don't understand what they're communicating to you.
That was something I really didn't consider at the beginning. Like I'm almost at 2 years like doing it full time, but just considering their brand and their message wasn't something that I would have in mind, really. It's been through a couple of my more consistent clients that
Mhm.
I've had to think that way,
Yeah.
because for one of my clients, we were putting up videos like every month or every other month, sometimes twice a month, and then everything was cool, but then it got to a point where she was. It's not that she was unhappy with the video, but she's like, it needs something.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, what does it need? And we really had to sit down and talk. Well, what are you trying to portray here?
Yep.
And I was like, man, this is something I need to do like with every single client.
For sure.
Really understand what they're trying to say.
And that right there is definitely the reason I wanted to have this conversation, because at the beginning, most creatives won't understand that you actually need to talk to your clients, right? Communication is something that's very valuable.
I super appreciated her being, not open, but like direct and having like just the communication to be able to say like, I don't like this one. Like we need to do something about it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? She didn't just go with it.
And as creatives, and this is something that we're going to get into in the second portion, but as creatives, we tend to kind of have this like self-doubt, right? We tend to have this attitude of negativity where like we don't want people to tell us that they don't like our work or that they don't whatever, when in reality we need that,
Yeah.
right? Like if you're
I grew right there.
yeah,
I felt
exactly.
myself
If you
learn something.
if you have a logo situation where it's like, hey, I don't like any of what you did,
Yeah.
it just means that you take that and say that's not the route I'm going.
Yeah, for sure.
I need to figure out a different route. It doesn't mean you're fired, right?
Mhm.
And a lot of people immediately think like, well, if they don't like my work, they're going to get rid of me. Like, no.
Huh.
This is why communication is so critical.
Yeah.
Because if you can communicate with a client and say, hey, this is the work that I did for you. What do you think? And they're just like, well, I don't like it. And be like, okay, so let's figure something out. That's exactly the situation you ran into.
For sure.
And in terms of strategy, being able to convey that you understand their brand and you've communicated that and said, I want to do something to better your business, they're not going to go anywhere else. They already have you. And if you're a good creative who's a little bit more flexible, you'll be able to provide the service that you were hired for. And what ends up happening is that communication is basically the only thing that would have stopped you from being essentially getting rid of, right? Like fired or whatever you want to call it.
But it adds like a different element of like you caring. Like it's not just a job and it's not just about money.
Yeah.
An element of you caring about what you're doing, but also caring about their business and their future.
Well, and you know, one of the things is like there's a pie chart. I forget. It's by like a workforce solutions thing, and it basically talks about like why people keep hiring certain people, or in terms of like employee retention, right? And the majority of it comes down to people that are consistent and people that can communicate. It doesn't even actually matter that you're good at your job. It just matters that you can you can communicate what you're doing to other people, and you show up. And I thought about that, and I was like, you know what? That's true. It's really valuable because at the end of the day, two designers can be the same, but if one has a really bad attitude and doesn't talk to me, I don't want to be with them. I'll actually settle for somebody who's not as good if we can constantly work and have a communication that says, hey, these are the problems. Can you address this? Can you do this? And I'm willing to pay them a little bit more because of that, even if they're not as good. Because I would rather have that than somebody who just said, hey, you know, here's X amount of money, and then you never hear from them again. It's like, well, then how do you know they're making something that you want?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, definitely. And I think in the same way, like, going back to last week's podcast about, like, talking about processes and stuff, like, it's important in that process to have milestones and have check-ins and post dates of, like, hey, we're working through this, but this is, like, what I already got. I already went to go shoot, and I'm looking at this ideas, and, like, communicating that, because it's going along the lines of building that trust through communication. So going back to, like, what you said, it's like, okay, we're like here, and we're not just gonna disappear. We're not we're gonna be consistent, and we're showing the progress in where we're going.
Yeah, and you know, like moving into the second part, right, which is attitude in terms of like how you talk to a client is very, you know, important, because and you know, I was going to ask you guys this question in regards to this, you know, second topic that we're talking about. Have you guys ever been fired? And if you have, what's that experience like in terms of the communication?
I've never been fired yet.
And I mean from like creative works, like clients that, you know, because it's happened to me. It's happened to me a couple of times. And when it happened to me, it was essentially a disagreement in where we saw the creative work going, which is totally understandable. But it's been handled in two different ways. And one way, one individual approached me and said, hey, we don't need your work anymore. And that was it. There was no more communication after that. I was locked out of accounts, and I was, which understandable, right? But it went from one day to the next saying, hey, we don't need you around anymore. And I thought that was very interesting, which, I mean, no hard feelings. I get it. People have different styles. But I don't think that that one was very approachable, and I don't want to work with them anymore, even if they came later, right? The other one was, hey, you know, we're not able to see where you're going with this kind of thing. We appreciate everything you've done for us, but right now, it's not the direction we want to go in. And I thought about that, and I was like, they both said the same thing, right? They both said that they didn't want me around anymore. But one said bye, and the other one said, hey, hold up, like, we value what you did for us.
Yeah, for sure.
Right? And that becomes that, like, okay, cool. And for them, I still have a great relationship with them. They ask me things. I even consulted for them, you know, 6 months down the road, and was like, hey, you know what, I'll help you guys out. And it was a great relationship.
Yeah.
The other people have emailed me, I think it was like a year and a half later, and I just didn't respond. I was like, yo, I'm done. Like, if you're going to be rude to me, why should I even consider, you know, anything like that? In terms of creative work, typically they will come back at some point if you are good at what you do. right? Because I think that's one of the key things there. If you can communicate your worth and show them in terms of your, your products, your services, they'll come back.
I have a situation kind of like that. It's not that I was fired, but I basically did a video for a client, and he never put it out, right? And I figured he would have tagged me had he put it out. And maybe a month or two passed by, and I was like, whatever happened to this video we did? Went into like his business page. He never put it out. I was like, okay, I guess, right? And maybe months later, almost a year later, he put out a similar video that he shot with somebody else. So I was like, so he wasn't happy with what we did, so he just hired somebody else to shoot it a different way. But it was essentially the same thing, right? And there was kind of like not enough communication for me to know exactly what he wanted.
Yep.
And this was kind of early on when maybe I didn't know how to ask the right questions as far as what he needed. But he did rehire me
Nice.
a few months back to shoot something for his business, and he put it out. So I was like, okay, this is cool. I'm not mad at that, you know?
Yeah, and in terms of having the right attitude in these conversations, I think that was it, right? Because if you
We stayed in contact.
yeah, because if you immediately burn bridges over somebody firing you or not wanting to pay you, or they didn't agree to the contract or the proposal, whenever you're having communication, you should never let that be the thing you focus on. Right? We've had plenty of people where we send proposals out and they never respond. It doesn't mean that we're negative towards them. It doesn't mean our attitude changes. We stand on our creative, I would say morals, right? But like, we just want to provide a service, right? And typically, like, yes, you can be rude and yes, you can be whatever, but it's like, why? What is the benefit in the conversation? What's the benefit in the communication? It's always, what is it? You catch more bees or flies with honey or whatever the term is, right? And I definitely think that that's the case. Like, if your reputation is that you end up having this attitude that's negative whenever you deal with clients that are terrible or whatever, you don't know who they know.
Yeah, for sure.
And that becomes one of the critical parts of like, oh man, did I just say the wrong thing to the wrong person? And that's especially down here in the valley, like everybody knows how close knit we are. You don't want that to be the reason that nobody wants you around anymore just because you were negative to one person. And that's it's very possible to happen here.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So on that note, in regards to having, like asking the right questions and stuff like that and having the right attitude and communication, what would you say are the key things that people miss out on in terms of like asking for things? So as like a designer, right? As a client, what should I go in knowing, or what should I go in asking you specifically? Because we looked at it from the other side of like, what do you need to ask a client for? What should the client be asking out of designers? Like, am I asking you for your portfolio? Am I asking you for previous work? Who have you worked?
Yeah, I definitely think like we should, as a business owner in the past too, like we should be asking people for their work and like who they worked with before as well. So we get an experience of like, okay, this is my brand, going back to what you're talking about. And this is what I know, like what we're doing. Like you're not going to go hire someone that does like real grungy work for like a high professional like law office.
Yeah.
And if they've never done that before and that's not their style, like so you should definitely be looking at those things and asking like graphic designers or creative directors, like, let me see what you've put out and see if like you guys fit what we're looking for.
That's true.
Because if it's a hand letter like that's not going to look good if for a law office like logo, but that's all they know how to do, or that's what they do really well. So I think that's the basis level. Like you're looking for people and looking at their like what they've produced, and then I think just pushing for that initial conversation in person or over the phone at least. So like if we're trying to build consistency and trust and value, like if we can't have like a conversation or communicate in the right way or even be in each other's presence because our personalities don't like mesh, like how are we going to work on a project together?
Definitely.
You know, because
Yeah.
like, oh, I hate you the whole time, or like I don't like your personality, or like whatever. Like, how is this bond, this work friendship or whatever, gonna develop into like you caring about my business?
Yeah.
You know, so those are like the two things that I would like consider.
I would agree with that. Like them asking for your portfolio or a website or something to check out your work. That way they could see if you're the right person for the
Mhm.
job. Like if it's a client that's getting married, and they want to hire somebody who vlogs to do their wedding because they have a nice camera or whatever. You know what I mean?
It's
Like-
just gonna be your face the
Like,
whole
yeah,
time
yeah,
at
yeah.
the wedding.
No, but I'm saying like I've done a few weddings, enough to already know what the details you
Mhm.
need to get for the video to be complete. And if it's somebody that has experience in shooting other kinds of videos and is great at it, it might miss out on certain stuff.
Mhm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Definitely.
And I think going on the wedding thing, you know, there's a lot of times, specifically, like my best friend got married like 2 years ago, I think. They were looking for a wedding photographer that understood um, their wedding because, I mean, they're Catholics, I'm Catholic, and like there's certain things that happen in a Catholic mass and a
Mhm.
Catholic wedding opposed to like other services or other wedding services, that you need to know someone that has that experience, not only with weddings, but maybe in a Catholic setting, because there's a lot of times where you don't. And I've seen this in the past where like photographers, videographers are very disrespectful to the area and the setting. So if you
Oh,
can't communicate that and
Yeah.
then they don't have that experience, it doesn't help the wedding. Like it's it's hurting the wedding and their experience. But then when they go back and watch the video, it's like none of the things that the couple finds important is actually in the wedding video.
I actually had a case like that not too long ago. But we went into the church, and usually when you go into the church, you talk first to the people in charge, and they give you the rules, what's allowed, what's not allowed.
Mhm.
And the lady that was in charge, she's like, you can't go beyond this spot. You can't go to that side. Like, if you're gonna be on this side, this is where you're gonna stay. And so most of the wedding it was one-sided.
Mm-hmm.
Oh wow.
I saw the photographer like not care. He wasn't associated with me, but he went to the other side towards the end, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna go and get that side.
Mm-hmm.
But even then, it wasn't enough, and she complained about that part.
Yeah.
And it was like, yo,
Yeah, man, and
And I mean, again,
it's also communicating to the people of the
Yep.
venue because
exactly.
like that's what I thought. I figured like a lot of those things, but their wedding video was beautiful and it was like a big experience and it was focused on the mass. But even during the wedding, because I was in the wedding, like they weren't in the way. They were being real respectful. Like they had been there before. They knew what was happening, and it wasn't just a one angle shot, but it's that I think they put rules on certain things, but like if you have that experience and you communicate like, hey, I know what's happening, I get it, I value it as well, even though that may not be your religion, but hey, like don't worry, I will be respectful of the area, like, but I want this to be the experience that they want to add value to their wedding ceremony. And like, but you know where to go and stuff, and like they don't necessarily have to have those rules for you.
And I think the like in my mind when I'm always considering it from like a value proposition. Right?
Yeah.
When you understand those rules, when you understand and you've already communicated with that, it's more confidence with you as a creative.
Mm-hmm.
And in terms of a business, right? If I'm looking at hiring you, I find that because you already know the rules, because you already know these things, like it's more desirable and more hireable.
Yeah.
Right? It's like I want that one, right? I want that person because they already know everything. I don't have to educate them. They don't need to whatever. Because that becomes one of those situations where it's like, how do I gain experience if I'm don't ever have a job?
Yeah.
Or it's like, oh
Yeah,
god,
for
and
sure.
everybody's seen that. It's like, how do I go to school if I don't have? It's
I
like,
remember that commercial.
No, but I think even in the same way, like that could be a marketable thing here in the
Yes.
valley, because they're like maybe not practicing, but claimed at least a big percentage of the valley is Catholic. So like shooting weddings for that you have experience in that, you know.
Yeah, and it becomes an angle, right? Because one of the questions that I want to have in a later conversation, right? But as soon as you're able to have these kind of conversations and communicate and understand your value and all that jazz, your worth goes up incredibly, right? It's like, hey, I know how to shoot weddings. It's like, oh, specifically for dogs, right? Let's just say that as that's the example.
And I'm the dog whisperer, so they won't move.
Yeah, so imagine that, right? It's like if you're really great at that one thing specifically, hell yeah, right? Upcharge that like crazy, because nobody else will be able to do it. Nobody else has the experience. Nobody else is doing it.
And the quality.
Yeah, and the quality and everything else that follows behind it. But, going along with, that kind of idea, there was and this is one of the things that I very much dislike that people, or that, I didn't say people, but businesses, organizations do, is they will reach out through social media and give a blanket statement of, we're looking for creatives to design a shirt for us. And they do it through social media and essentially turn it into a competition where the creative gets a shout out. So in terms of a business or an organization communicating stuff like that, I just wanted to know, what's y'all's opinion? So say I am an organization affiliated with, let's just say the city, because we've run into that. And it says something to the effect of, hey, we want you to design our next shirt. We're going to have everyone submit designs, and the lucky winner gets to keep a shirt.
I feel like, well, there's a lot of I can go ranting on, but I think like if they look at it, like if everybody just looked at it and be like, okay, like damn, that brings no value to either or, right? And like we've talked about, like never working for free, and there has to be some trade, like even if it was awareness or like portfolio work or whatever, but like there's no sense of brief, there's no sense of like building out your, like being able to put into practice your process, because the brief is real like a blanket. You can't communicate to the client really. You can't have these stages or these milestones of like working on your craft and putting that out there and like having this conversation relationship. So really it's doing yourself a disservice, and them doing creatives and themselves a disservice, because they're not necessarily getting what they want.
Yeah.
They're just getting a bunch of different images that they can pick from. And I mean, from what I know and my experience with the clients, like when you give them too many options, you'd never get anywhere in the same way as if you didn't give them any options. So, I mean, the one way that I would consider it is like, hey, like submit work that you already have so we can look at your portfolio.
Yeah.
And then,
that's a
hey,
smart way to handle that.
This is where we want to go. You'd be the best person to fit. We don't have the budget.
Yeah.
But, maybe you can come have a conversation with us and we can figure out how to work it out and figure it out. That is so much different than, hey, we're having a contest. Like, submit all your shirts and your ideas, and we're going to give you an opportunity, and we're going to put your name out there. Like, no, because that still shows value, even though they may not have the budget for it.
Yeah.
So,
and
I don't know.
It goes back to having that appreciation for the work, right?
Yeah.
And creatives just want to be appreciated. All right, especially for their value, their time, their energy, their efforts. But if you have that communication and it just says like, hey, I appreciate what you're doing for me, because that's the reality of it, right? Because if they could do it, they would have done it, right? If they could create this work of art or this work, this graphic, this logo, this design, whatever it is, they would have done it, but they can't.
I won't say who, but somebody did approach me and they wanted to do oh man, I hope I don't come off as like a douche, but they basically wanted for me to do something with them. It sounded more like for them, right? And in return, I would get exposure, right? But I mean, I did have to look into, well, is it worth it for me? You know
Yeah.
what I mean? And I was like, what can they really do for me? You know what I mean? Like,
Mm-hmm.
really, they can't. And it was like a legit organization, right? But I was like, basically, they're supposed to be doing this on their own,
Yeah.
and they see that I'm doing it, and they kind of want to get it for free.
Damn,
You
dude,
know what I mean?
Talking about us or what?
No, no, no. And I was like, well, what? I actually talked to you guys about it. I was like, what can they do for me?
Yeah.
And I remember you guys were like, that's like the right question you should be asking yourself. And I mean, I was cool and nice about it, but it was like at this point, like I kind of have to be a little bit more careful
Yeah.
what I get into. You know what I mean?
And that's a really good point of being careful. When you communicate with someone and they straight up, let's just say like, hey, I'll pay you, and they don't pay you, right? Stuff like that. You run into situation like I've run into that even at a high level, where people will be like, hey, you know what? We're gonna have you contracted for whatever, but let's start having a conversation about what you can do for us now, and then the contract never comes. And I've been helping them for a month now. And
Yeah, I think it's like definitely finding that balance, like, because I struggle with that a little bit, like in initial meetings with like clients, because like it's like I'm super excited,
yeah,
about like, oh, I've already thought about 1,000 ways and a thousand like strategies that we can put out and ways to do that, right? And it's like, all right, like hold back,
yes,
like don't give everything out, like, because at some point, if you give them everything, then they don't need you.
Yep.
They can just go to the next person that's cheaper and be like, well, this person said this, so like, hey, can you just do this? And so I think it's finding that balance of like, hey, yeah, we want to provide value to people and help people, but we don't want but don't give all your secrets,
yeah,
but give all your secrets. So like find a balance between teaching people and putting value, but not the work and the experience behind it.
There's a really good I guess saying or a phrase or whatever you call it, that it's basically there's two rules or two secrets to success, right? And the first secret is don't tell anyone anything, or don't tell anyone everything. And that's it. And I always thought that was a great idea, because it's like, well, what's rule number 2? It's like, what's the first one, right? Don't tell anyone everything. Because if I tell you the second one, you won't need me anymore.
Yeah.
And I think that is where the value becomes derived from. When you're working with clients as creatives, you shouldn't ever look at it that you're working from, like you're having an uphill battle.
Yeah.
Right? Because a lot of times creatives go into conversations with the attitude of like, man, I need this job, I need this money, I need this, like, and the idea isn't that you should focus on the money aspect of it versus the creative. You should look at it as creative, that you're worth. And a lot of times as creatives, we don't walk into those conversations with that attitude.
Yeah.
Like, you should definitely know your worth, know your position. We talked about this, right? Like, even if you do videos for dogs, you better be good at what you do and walk in with confidence. And if you don't have this, attitude that, and I guess I'll phrase it this way: the first time I ever charged someone $10,000 was the first
that's
time.
What I was thinking too.
Was the first time I charged someone $10,000.
That's what I was thinking right now, man.
And in reality, I was nervous and scared and whatever. And when they said, "Hey, we'll give you, more than that," I was like, "Whoa, what? I could charge more than this?" And it was just like, "Whoa, this is interesting." And the reality is that people will pay you. But if you walk in with your head sunk down, you're already defeated, you're already whatever, nobody wants that, right? Because they know that just from your attitude, that you're probably not going to be great at communicating. Like, you need to walk in with confidence.
I think a lot of us learn it the hard way,
Oh yeah. Totally.
I've had people owe me money, like, not a lot of them, but like there's one in particular when I was just like hitting the ground running, you know what I mean? And to this day hasn't paid me, you know.
Mm.
And so now I try to get either have to like for them to put money down
Yeah.
or pay me by the day of or like stuff like that. You know what I mean? To get the ball rolling, and that happened with a recent client where um, I had to like get on the ball because I was like, yo, if I'm not assertive, if I'm not
Mhm.
after it, like they're just gonna let it go and pay me whenever they want to pay me.
Yeah, for sure,
Mhm.
dude. And I think like it's so hard to get at that point, right? Like, oh, like I just want them to see my work and then like they could pay me. And people have those attitudes like, oh, I'm not gonna pay you to. I was like, no, like you don't. You for everything else, like this coffee, for example. Like I had to pay him for it before he started making it.
Yeah.
You know, and like to find that balance and like going back to pricing, right? Like the 10 G's, like that's what I was thinking too. Um, like to build that if we don't have that confidence as a creative, to build that the confidence, like, and I take it from the future, right? Like Ben Burns was saying, like what Chris Do told him to do, and he's like, oh, just call these many people this next week, and just tell them a price, and then
Yeah.
the next person you call, say that price, like raise that price and say it, and you know I've put that into work, that method of like, like, okay, I sold a logo for $800, so next time it's like 1200, like just start saying big numbers, and you eventually your value, like how you value yourself for your work, will just start going up as well, because if someone pays you this much, now you can move to that next level,
Yeah, we had this conversation earlier where, a family member asked for a logo, and it was like, hey, I'll give you $50 for a logo. I'll give you $50 for this design. That's fantastic. Awesome. Thank you. That's going to cover about 14 minutes of my hourly rate, So it's this conversation of when somebody comes to you and says, hey, I'm going to give you $50 for a logo, understanding that the last logo I charged for was, let's just say $1,500, I would have to legitimately do 30 logos at $50 to get to that $1,500. And then you think about that. It's like I would have to do my process 30 times. I would have to design. That's unreal.
I wouldn't
right?
even make it through the research phase of my
Yeah.
process, dude.
But then you stop and think about it, and you're like, man, Adobe Photoshop is about $50 a month. You barely even cover my use of the tool,
Your tool.
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And as creatives, we need to understand that.
Electricity, Ben.
yeah, like we're talking about the value here, the pricing. As creatives, you have to understand like those, at least for me, those test my attitude, right? When somebody approaches me and says, "Hey, I don't want to pay you what you're worth," I look at them and it's like, okay, I appreciate your offer and I understand where you're coming from, and maybe you don't have the money that are that that I require to do my work and my process, but here's someone else that maybe can do it, right? And I push them to someone that's Fiverr, freelancer, cheaper, whatever it is, because it's just not going to be worth it in the long run.
Or even like people that are just starting off that aren't charging anything. $50 for them is a big step up.
Yes.
But and people that we mentor or whatever, but like for them to just be like, hey, here's $50, like create this, and it's like, do you know, like you're coming to me for a reason, because apparently you know that I do this, and this is what I do for a living, and this is how I eat, and this is how I pay my bills. Like, really?
Yeah.
Like, really? And it's harder, I think, when it's from family, because like going back, the experiences that we've had, like the work that we've done, and working with family members, if that's my brothers or other like aunts and stuff, like to think like, hey dude, like I did all this work for you and we're here at this level, and like you have money even though we're not making money, like, and this is the last thing that you're gonna put value on and put money to, because like then you wouldn't have had all this stuff, like all the startup stuff.
Yep.
And so like, yeah, it's frustrating, and then to have a positive attitude and to like go to the workplace and be like, all right, rally the troops, like let's do this, this is the strategy, and it's like, well, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if I want to wake up and go to the office every day, or whatever that may be. But yeah, to then come back and just like, oh, shake it off, like approach it, like let's go, because I think it's like finding that balance, going back to finding that balance, right? But between working for family and them seeing, hey, like I'm not an asshole. This is just business,
Yeah.
and like this is me valuing myself, which is also like you want me to value myself. I'm part of your family, and like the same experience inside of the Catholic Church that we find in music. So worship leader, worship band, asking for money has like been the biggest struggle. Like going, but like all the rehearsals,
Yeah.
all the people's gas, all the like paying for the equipment, paying for the trailer. And then one of the Catholic social teachings is like paying people a fair wage, but it's like nobody in the church wants to pay people a fair wage. So, I mean, not to talk negative about my faith, because I love the church, but
I mean,
that practice of
yeah.
like, hey, this is actually what our teachings are, and then I'm over here like asking you, and you don't want to pay me for it, and it's like I'm not paying you because I want to make money. Like, we don't even pay ourselves. Everything goes back into the ministry. It goes back into like doing this for other people and spreading the message.
I had somebody from a church that wanted something for the church, and he wanted a cheaper price. And I mean, I couldn't go any lower. And he was like, "It's for the church. God will thank you.
Oh man.
Yeah.
God will thank you."
Yeah.
And the conversation got to a point where I was able to respond the way I responded without him like being offended. But I was like, I have 2 girls, and they don't eat off thanks. You know, like.
Nah, yeah, dude.
You know, just that alone, you know, just like that communication, that could have easily gone south, right? That could have easily been turned into a negative. And especially in a church community, they would have talked about you and talked negatively. And
you gotta go find a new church on the other side of town.
Yeah. But, you know, in regards to that situation, like, as creatives, we shouldn't walk into an opportunity, because, you know, every situation is essentially an opportunity, where we look at it from a position of emotion. We should always keep our creative hat on and our professional hat on. Even in regards to a church situation, because, you know, that's definitely something that is like belief and faith and like core values. But at the end of the day, what the church is setting out to accomplish is a objective goal, right? To convert more followers, or to, you know, something like that. And you should look at it from that standpoint and not get emotionally invested to say, oh, well, you know, like you said, like, well, God will thank you. Like, I understand that, and I appreciate that, and I definitely believe in, you know, what I believe in. But at the end of the day, I have 2 daughters, and we need to eat too. And I think a lot of people will appreciate you, at least in that situation as well, right? Being that upfront about that and meeting them, right? Because if you would have been like, well, I just, look, man, like, if you start hesitating anywhere in there, you run into situations that lead to being misunderstood, not being clear, them essentially creating their own identity for you, or their own personality for you, their own interpretation of you. And you don't want that ever. Especially from a creative to a client conversation, you don't want the client to ever think that you are not the expert in the room at what you're doing. You don't want them to think that you're fumbling. You don't want them, and it is difficult because it's built over experience, right? So you want to continue to say, hey, you know what, like, I need to do this thing, and I will explain this thing, and I will have this conversation with you and be very clear about it. And if they don't respond in like kind, just be like, okay, thank you, and I appreciate the opportunity, but it's not for me. And I think as creatives, we don't communicate that enough. Like, one of the things that creatives don't really understand is you can fire a client. You can get rid of a client and just be like, yo, like, and this is one of the things, like, you know, that's happened to me before. It's like, hey, I need website design. I'm like, okay, I know how to code. And then they're like, well, can you add some graphics to it? Like, that's not my job. And as creatives, like, we don't actually put those boundaries of, hey, you know, like, yes, I know how to do that too, but you're not paying me for it. Like, well, yeah, but can't you just do that for me? Like, no. Like, well, then, I mean, why do I even hire you as a web designer? there's two different things,
Mhm.
right? One's graphic design, one's web design.
Yeah. And I think that's going back to that like communication, right? Like people don't understand what words mean.
Yeah.
But I think I'm going through that situation right now. Actually, like I'm working on this team, consulting them and like helping them. Um, but it's a struggle, and like I have to contemplate like, is this worth my time?
Yeah.
Because like, is the value there with the struggle that I'm going through? And like, I could tell already, like those like the attitudes and like the and not a negative, but just like their
Yeah.
how they perceive stuff and like where they're going. There's value in where they're going if I could take them there, but the process to get them there in the amount of time that they need to get there is not gonna happen
Yeah.
unless there's like a big attitude change. So I think going back to like firing a client, right? Like you need to figure out if like one, are you gonna love to come and do the work,
Mm-hmm.
and not only your value but also a little bit of like what you're getting paid. Does that add to it, like to show up and deal with all the hardships or all the struggle?
Yeah.
Because a lot of times it's not. It's not. But I mean, it's not all about money in that value battle. But it's also the mission and buying into all that stuff. But sometimes it's not worth it. And because at the end, if there's gonna be, if you let emotion in and there's
Yeah.
resentment and hurt and stuff, then you've like you've defeated kind of the whole value of everything that you're receiving for it, because like you're never going to want to go back, you're never going to want to deal with that, and every time you see that, whatever the product is, or outcome, you're going to be like emotionally invested. And
Yeah.
so but yeah, like going back to that, like firing a client, like I've been like trying to work through that, like, hey, you know, things that are happening are not things that we talked about. They're actually the complete opposite.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of things that I don't know, and it's like, how can I help you if you're not trusting me with everything?
If you're not communicating.
Yeah, if you're not communicating. And then in a breakout, right? Is that what,
Yeah.
yeah, a breakout of that with another team within that team. It's like going back to that communication, like everybody has different opinions and the words that they're using are offending other people. And there's emotional value, like attachment to like certain designs and stuff like that. And it's like, well, I can't help you. we gotta work through this first and like understand where everybody's coming from. And you turn from a designer or a brand strategist or creative director to a therapist.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's part of the job too. Depending on how much you're getting paid and how much value like you're getting from it.
Well, also, you know, so I've run into a similar situation where it was two co-founders, and I had a conversation with them. I was contracted for a year, and my year was up. And basically, one of the co-founders he said, if you're going to go with this creative team, we don't want to be involved. So he said, I'm going to leave if you stick with this creative team, which was me and let's just say 4 other people that were doing a certain style of work and pushing a certain strategy.
No.
And he didn't believe in it. And he had, you know, people on the other side, like maybe 2 or 3. So then it became the one co-founder versus, you know, like let's say 2 people and whatever, and then 5 creatives, more or less. And he was like, well, I mean, the co-founder's been my friend for years. I'm sorry, guys. Like, I'm going to have to get rid of you guys. And I thought that was really interesting. He's like, you know, I'm not going to renew the contract. I'm like, as in my part, like, not renew the contract. But he got rid of the creatives that were on staff. And when I sat and thought about that, I was like, you know, man, like, no hard feelings from me. But you're going to have to explain to 4 other people that because your friend didn't like them, you got rid of them. And this wasn't the best path for the business. And I let him know that. Like, I told him in more or less that way that he was being an asshole, right? It's like, yo, what you just did...
Dick move.
Yeah, basically. It's like, what you just did was not for the benefit of your business, but because your friend told you something. And at the end of the day, that's where those emotions come in and just say, like, even from like, I'm kind of addressing this from like a business standpoint, but from a business standpoint, like when you're emotionally involved in that way, the creative work that you just threw out the door could have been what saved your business, right?
Yeah.
But because you let emotions get involved at some point, and I'm not saying like don't, but like when they're clouding judgment in that regard, where it's like, hey, you better pick me or pick them, like, because if you pick them, we're leaving.
Yeah.
Like that's not only is that a messed up thing to do from a co-founder who says your friend, but you just missed out on an opportunity to work with good creatives, and what you essentially told them that they'd be around for a long time was a lie. And you know, just like a lot of communication there, and it just became one of those situations where it's like, you know what, I don't want to work for you anymore. Right? Like I'm okay, and I'm glad that my contract is up, and I don't want to come back, because after seeing what you just did, and it's incredibly, I don't want to say ironic, but like funny, they reached out to me a year later and essentially was like, hey man, like we've seen your success with, you know, what you're doing. We've seen you make more content, and you guys are starting to live stream the sports show.
Yeah, yeah.
And he was like, you know, we want to get into that as well. I'm like, okay, cool. And that was it.
Good luck.
Yeah, I was just like, oh, that's cool, man. Like, you guys want to do it too?
Good for you.
Yeah, no, and that was the approach that I had. But at some point, it was just like, man, if you're gonna sit there and let these emotions and have the attitude that says, I'm gonna choose my friends over what's good for the business or the value that these creative people were putting on there, and because I was at a high enough level, I could see that we were generating income and revenue to keep everybody hired. It wasn't a situation where, oh, they were just costing us money. It was him literally deciding, like, well, my friend didn't like you. It's like, but
blurred lines.
yeah, but as creatives, that fucking happens. That happens a lot, right? Where it's like, oh, well, I have somebody else who would do it for cheaper, and they're a friend.
Yeah.
Like, ugh.
Yeah, for sure, man. I think like that's such a struggle, dude. Like all around, but and then even seeing like places, and it happens a lot in the church. Like, oh, we have someone doing it. It's like, well, what's their job title? Oh, they're my assistant, and like they run the bulletin and the website and the social media and like all this stuff. It's like, do you know all those things are monsters inside of themselves, and like we should be bringing like quality, not just doing it because we need to do it. But it's like, oh, they're doing it for free, or they're doing it within their hours of like what I'm already paying them, instead of having like another thing, or they've always been with us. Yeah. So like, why are we gonna get? And it's like, well, because you want to upgrade things, and that's what I was kind of thinking about. I think the attitude change, going back to talking to attitude and working in communication, for us and me specifically, was in the past is like, oh, they have like a bunch of crappy stuff, like I can go in there and change things and it can be better. Yeah. And I think in the past couple years, it's been like, dude, like nobody wants to hear like
their shit sucks.
And like they and like you want to change everything because it's like their baby and they're emotionally attached. Yep. But I think coming in with the attitude of like, hey, like, you guys are great. You guys have a great foundation. We just want to communicate that better to other people and upgrade what you already have. Yeah. Totally different attitude. And actually, I don't know if you like run into anything like that, Ismail, because
not yet.
Not yet. Like, not yet. Because I don't know if you see people that are already like producing video content, but it's like phone stuff. And
like, I see that all the time, bro.
And then
I'm like, you need help.
Yeah, right. Like, and then like offering that, hey, like we can work. Yeah, it's gonna be a bigger budget or whatever, but the quality of content could be the same message, and like upgrade what you're doing so people can visually be appealed. Because you do a lot of food stuff, so like you can eat with your eyes, than just a phone like video.
So I had this come up specifically with, and this is gonna sound crazy, the Department of Defense. We were working.
Can we talk about that stuff?
I think I can talk about it vaguely, right? We were working on a software development cycle and designing some different software for them. and it was like an offshoot of, something that they needed. And the approach that one of our developers had was, I am going to reinvent whatever the hell he was talking about. And immediately one of the people told us the same thing. It's like, nobody's going to buy that. Nobody's going to buy any of that because nobody wants change. Your job was to add a layer.
Mm-hmm.
Your job was to add essentially functionality to a certain thing.
Yeah.
And then this guy over here was talking about how he's going to rebuild it and recreate it. And they looked at him and they're like, we don't want you. And immediately we're just like, okay, so we don't want you guys. Never mind, bye.
Wow.
And that one guy, because he wanted to change everything, cost us the job.
Yeah.
And I thought, like, wow, that's so crazy. Like, and you're right. Like, as creatives, we have this attitude about like, oh yeah, you need a new website, you need a new logo, It's like, hang on, let me communicate with the client, let me talk to them, let me have a meeting. And one of the rules that we have now is essentially every time we talk to a client, it's if we're talking to them in text, email, whatever, the next step is a meeting in person. There is no more emails sent back and forth. There's no more text messages. There's no messages at all.
Mm-hmm.
The first message is like, hey, we are interested in your services.
Yeah.
And we respond with like, okay, when are we meeting? That's it. And if they're like, well, we're busy, I'm like, okay, well then you don't really care about our services. Because if you did, you would meet with us.
And I think that was like a big like process change for us.
Oh, definitely.
Because at first it was like, all right, like, okay, this is the pricing and this is like all the stuff and like let's shoot it at them, and then we wouldn't get they wouldn't respond to us, or they'd be like try to like haggle with us, and it's like, whoa, okay, what do you need first of all? What do you think you need to like then what's going on? So like we can't get there if we don't meet with them, because they can say something through text messages, but we can't really read their body language or like anything like that and ask them the constant questions that we need to ask them. So it was a big attitude change for us and process change, because it was like, dude, let's just get to know people and be with people, and then ask them about their business, because they're gonna feel like we care, which we do care, because that's I think
Part of the job.
Part of the job, but also I think the direction of where we're coming from. I think Area 956 is built off of a care, like us caring for our environment and our community. So also doing creative things for businesses is like, we have a passion for this and we want to do this, so we care about it because we want to upgrade everybody, right? We want to we want to rise all the boats.
So rising seas raises all ships. Yeah.
So I think like it's like just being there and then being able to communicate, and then if we know that we said a word and it kind of rubbed them the wrong way or they didn't understand it, we can now explain to them, hey, like, yeah, we might be talking about rebrand, but that doesn't mean that we're losing everything that you're doing or everything that you've done in the past. We want to communicate it better for you. Yeah,
and especially when it comes to pricing, right? Like if you ever sent out a message that was like, oh, somebody had reached out to us and was like, hey, I see that you guys have like 35,000 followers or whatever it is on Instagram. Yeah, I'm gonna talk about it.
All right.
I want to hear this.
So he reached out specifically about, some concert or something. And it became a conversation of like, he's like, hey, I'll give you stuff for free. I'm like, well, our minimum rate, like when it comes to this kind of stuff is, X amount of money. And he was like, for 35,000, 40, whatever. And I just put 200,000 followers across all social media. And he was like, yeah, I don't think so. And I was just like, so what was this guy's intention? Why did he even reach out in the first place if he didn't see value? And then I did the math, and I was like, for X amount of money, we reached 200,000 people more or less. He needed to sell like 30 tickets or 40 tickets. And I was like, we reached 200,000 people, like 200 would be like 1% or 0.1%. And just that attitude that he walked in with and that communication via social media, right? That was the problem I had. Instead of actually having a conversation, especially when it came to pricing, I was like, man, do you not understand the value that we provide, or are you just being a jerk? And I think, one of the questions I have specifically for you, Ismail, because you're working through a lot of clients on social media, is when you give them a price, do you have to then send messages that explain why the price is or the breakdown or
it hasn't happened yet,
okay.
but I am at a point where the way I'm looking at it is like, let's say for example, I send out a price or whatever or details, and if they just don't respond or literally say, nah, it's too expensive, um, that happened.
Yeah.
The way I think about it now is like, okay, that's a client I didn't want to work with
Yes.
anyway,
Mm.
right?
That's good.
So I feel like I'm at a point where I'm kind of filtering these clients. And a perfect example is I have a friend that he does guitar lessons, right? He started a few years ago, and when he first started, he was charging, I think it was like 25 bucks for an hour, right? So after doing it a few months, he's like, you know what? I think I could charge 35. Started charging 35. This is all within a year. And then he's like, you know what? I'm going to say 45 and see what happens.
Yeah.
People started getting them for 45. What ended up happening is he started filtering all those clients that said no. So now his clients, they're all entrepreneurs, business people, doctors, like people that can pay those 45. And he, what is it, maybe like 6-7 years later, he's still doing it.
And you see, when it comes to stuff like that, it goes back to that logo conversation we had about designing a logo for $50 and having to design 30 of them for a $1,500 logo, right? He understood that what he was offering, it was worth more. And one lesson at $25 would be, one lesson at $50 would be $225. So he's literally saving himself an hour of his life.
Working less and valuing himself more, and he's getting a clientele that like appreciates money as well, because like they're like, oh, we're paying this, we're gonna show up and we're gonna do it. We understand we won't need to go for multiple times, you know.
And one of the things I want to stop here and kind of like address, because I'm sure if you've listened at any point this far, we're not advocating that you want money. We're advocating that you have worth.
Yeah.
And I think there's a huge difference in that. Like, there's plenty of creatives out there who are just doing it for the money, and that's fine, right? If they're successful, that's great. It's been proven, whatever. But in terms of what we're saying is, if you're a creative who loves what they do, which most of us do, understand that you are worth more. Because a lot of times as creatives, because we love what we do, we don't want to charge.
Yeah.
Right? Because, right, and that becomes one of those situations of like, well, shit, I need to feed my kids, but I really do enjoy this, and it doesn't feel like a job. It's like, hang on, let's step back. You are a business. Yeah. At any point in time that you are taking in money to produce or have a service or a product, you are a business. Whether you have the legal whatever or not, you are now a business. Approach it from that standpoint. Don't sit there and be like, well, it's because I love. It's like, hold up. Your kids need to eat. Your family needs to eat. Got to feed your dog. It's a business.
And value yourself appropriately. Like, of course, we're not going to, like, if you're not going to, like, take the time to figure out how long it takes you to create something, you know, like, and, like value yourself fully, like, the whole process, not just the video, but everything that, the equipment and everything that you're using, because that's all something that you've wasted value on, or time or money.
To me, it's valuing my time has been a big thing. Like, I have 2 kids, both go to school, so I'm like an on-the-go person, like every single day. And then there's activities after school that we have to go to. So just an hour itself is very valuable to me. You know what I mean? If I get an hour for myself, like, oh my God, that's super awesome. You know what I mean? So that's played a big part in kind of finding out what my self-worth is. You know what I mean? Just time itself is time is money.
Yeah. And I definitely think that attitude of that understanding, that self-worth, it plays a huge deal in the communication process, because you start understanding, like, look, man, I'm worth it. And you have a confidence, not an arrogance, but a confidence that says, I am worth it, and I understand why I'm worth it, but it's because I'm able to produce at a high level. Yeah. You know what I mean? and especially in, you know, conversation with the clients, or even just the other way around, like a business with a creative, it values, or it how do I say this? It helps everyone when a creative understands how to communicate their value and worth, because it not only saves the business time in terms of having to, like we were talking about the church stuff, if somebody knows that, you don't need to communicate with that, you know, communicate with them about that. If somebody understands what they want out of a video, that saves you time, energy, and ideas, where you don't need to use your brain as much, where you're like, okay, I don't need to think about everything. This person just wants this. I'm like, okay, cool, I can do that, right? Because then you just sit there and be like, okay, so that's going to be this much. And you can just repeat that. And if you're understanding your, you know, your entire process, which we talked about before, and all that jazz, and able to communicate it, fucking, that's a home run, right? All day. And that's something that's repeatable. That's something that you can charge more for. That's something that you have expertise in. And that's what, you know, this entire podcast, that's what I was trying to get out of you guys. So I guess for me, I feel like we're getting to a point where we can wrap up. But if there's any like extra things that you guys want to talk about, now would be the time.
Yeah, I think like one question, I guess, like how can, I think we talked a lot about like how we can communicate that value one-on-one with customers and our clients and like amongst each other. But I think like what efforts do you think we can do through our own channels and our own like efforts or portfolios or like whatever to communicate that value already?
So a lot of times, if you're a business looking for creatives, and I've been in this situation, put your most, like, a lot of people will look at a portfolio, so from a creative standpoint, let's go there. When you create a portfolio, highlight your top tracks, right? Like, so your greatest hits, there you go. And only put those. So don't put 10 things on your portfolio. Nobody gives a shit about the first, 10 or whatever it is. What they care about is 3, 2 maybe, right? Because if I watch one video and it's high quality and looks awesome, I'll watch the next one and be like, okay, it's the same. That's it, right? And if it fits the narrative, if it's good, if you have a demo reel, even better. Something that I can just watch real fast. But in terms of, as a creative, just highlight 1 or 2 cases, the best ones, right? That's it. You don't need to go further than that. As a business that's looking for creatives, that's what I'm looking for, right? So I kind of have the best of both worlds, I guess, because I've worked at a position of hiring creatives, and I've been a creative. And what ends up happening is when you're approaching to get more clients and stuff like that, you want to make it as easy as possible for them to say, okay, I'm going to call this guy. And, whether that's your website, your portfolio, your Instagram, however you're communicating with them, it could be a PDF that you send them. But essentially have 1 or 2 cases, right? Case studies, as we call them, that highlight, what you did for the client and, the end result and what, the job was for. And that's it. Because if you do too much, they lose, any kind of idea. And if you do too little, they're going to think you only do that thing. Yeah. So it's a mixed bag, but I hope that helps. Not sure if that completely answers.
Yeah, and I was thinking like one of the sides of that, but also just like I think what we've seen nowadays, like on social media, especially from other like experts, is like them communicating through their own like avenues. And I think something like the creative refresh is like one of those things. Like,
oh yeah, totally.
Not only like bringing value to other people, but us communicating as creatives, like, hey, this is why this is valuable.
Yep.
And like not just one-on-one to clients, but over like blasting it, like, not constantly, but every once in a while, like doing our own, if it's going live or getting asked questions and like, but like just saying, hey, I do video, but this is why I do video. This is why I'm passionate about it, and this is what I can bring. Or this, I do graphic design, this is why I do it, and this is what I'm trying to do. I guess in a sense of like our purpose and like what we're doing and mission, and kind of just letting that out. And of course, other people do it with their own podcast, with their own live series, but finding a way to do that, I think that's where like the question was coming from.
What
Like-
helps me is staying consistent, like putting out consistent work,
Yeah.
because that I want to think this is how it's working. People see how active I am, and they'll understand. Oh, he's a busy guy.
Yep.
Oh, he's out there doing stuff. Okay, yeah, he's
Okay.
worth whatever. You know what I mean?
That makes sense too.
So that's at least that's how I see it.
Yeah.
It never hurts to be a busy guy,
Yeah.
right? Because
I just pretend to be busy even when I'm not. No, yeah, I can't make it.
yep, too busy.
No.
But anyway, guys, I'd say that that's a wrap. I appreciate Ismail. I know your hour and your time is money, and I know it's all
I was
valuable.
throwing shade right there.
I know it's valuable, so I appreciate
Yeah.
you stopping by, Eddie. Thanks again.
Sure.
I guess that's it. This is the Creative Refresh. I always feel like I say that like I'm had peanut butter in my mouth. This is the Creative Refresh.
Yeah.
Thank you guys for tuning in. Appreciate it. Thank you guys for watching. If you're watching,
For sure. Check out all the stuff that's gonna be coming out.
yeah, look at all the great content you're missing out on.
Content. The next 4 kits, or the next 4 kit that's coming out this month, or did it come out next month?
Next
Next
month.
month.
It's coming out soon.
These other podcasts, stay tuned for it.
Yeah,
And yeah, nice.
give us some outro music.
They're not gonna hear it. Why do you say that?